Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to this very first episode in our brand spanking new podcast, Organic Talk on Artificial Intelligence. A little bit of a mouthful, but we're looking to cut through everything, the rumor, the hyperbole around AI and how it relates to software development and cybersecurity, to get deep down like a hot knife through butter and understand the fact from the fiction. We are unscripted, hoping on this first one to be barely edited, but that remains to be seen, and running mostly on caffeine. We aim to bring you the hottest takes, coldest facts, and just enough reckless speculation to keep things interesting. I'm Ryan Thornton, and I am being joined today by Messrs. Lopez and Scott, Jose Lopez and Fraser Scott, who bring us insight from their work actually using and developing AI capabilities. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for having me.
And as I said, this was born out of a need to cut through the noise and really examine how AI is changing the way we build secure software in general. Developers, much like the general public, are faced with a wave of new tools, technologies, and challenges. We want to explore the impact, the good, the bad, and the unexpected. So, before an ado has been in any way furthered, let's dive straight in with kind of a recent history lesson and also an understanding of what the state of play is now over the last 2 to 3 years. Had a lot of claims, a lot of way the world's going to change, should I say. So my question to you two now is, what does the life of a developer in the age of AI, as everybody keeps saying, look like now as opposed to how it looked 2 years ago?
Jose, do you want
Don't know, come at once. Take your turn, lads, take your turn.
to? I can kick things off. I think we're seeing, obviously, since the advent of and the popularization of ChatGPT, especially, I think obviously, it probably helps to distinguish between AI as it has existed traditionally. AI is, I think the term artificial intelligence was coined in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. So the concept of AI has been around for a generation or two, but things, in my opinion, from what I've seen, drastically changed a few years ago when large language models like ChatGPT came on the scene. And that has really impacted the day-to-day life of many developers, maybe not all of them. The organizations that I've been speaking to recently, they are, even the more slower moving skeptical ones are experimenting with putting AI in the hands of software developers within their organizations. So I think it may be a little bit early to see if it's a bit of a hype, but everything suggests that this is changing the way that we work with technology in very much the same way that the cloud did, in terms of when things moved to services like AWS and the cloud more generally. And I would argue that AI is potentially going to have a much bigger impact on everyone's lives.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that it has been 2 years, but probably the last year or so when the things starting to be, exploded everywhere. And like, I think that Tropic Sonnet 3.5 was like the the model that everyone started to use, and then the mood started to be for the developers. This can, in fact, be used. It's not like the old Copilot where it was like a super smart auto-completion. It's more like you can design a product from the beginning to the end.
Okay.
But everything needs to be, I mean, the mentality of the developers needs to change, and some have done it, and some is in the process of, and some are not, just skeptical and they don't want to.
Okay, so I saw a stat the other day. I don't know whether it's true, but and I can't remember who said it. But when it comes to choosing between the truth or the legend, always print the legend. And so the stat said that they asked people now, what's the first thing they do on a morning? And it was, check social media, have a look at my phone. And then they had the same stat for people in the 1980s. What's the first thing you do on a morning? Go for a pee. So with that in mind, when a developer wakes up and then logs on and starts working, let's say somebody who's embraced this AI that has decided that Stack Overflow's not for them. They're all the way on with the AI. What does their life look like now compared to when they were first getting up and having a pee, to murder that metaphor?
Well, it's a super good question. I'm talking for myself and my team and some of the people I have around. Before, like 2 years ago, when you needed to create something, you usually create a design. You have all these previous stuff to something. Even if you want to iterate like a POC and then iterate fast, you will need a thing. With the new tools, it's easier to just jump onto the code. Even though I don't think this is the right way, but it's easier to jump into the code, iterate super fast and see what happens. At least to have a POC to check if your idea is good enough. Then you can look at toss everything and then do it properly using AI or not. But I would say that that's like the most powerful thing right now is like you can iterate super fast. You can do something. You have an idea, you can try, and then you can toss everything, because in 1 hour you can do probably what you will need 4 hours to to complete. And so you can do in the same amount of time. You can iterate 4 times. It's much faster. Once you have the skills, I think it's much faster. It's better, in my opinion.
I think we're still at the stage where AI is, let's say, a utility, right? It's not a lifestyle, if you can apply that term to the life of a developer. My guess is, so I've seen, let's say, 3 broad scenarios that AI can impact a developer right now, off the top of my head. One is, as Jose described, if you're approaching a new problem, you want to get something done quick and fast, then ChatGPT or some other, Anthropic, Claude or whatever, can generate code ridiculously well based on a good description. But I think there's 2 other scenarios. One, for day-to-day usage, AI and GPTs are replacing traditional Google searches. And as we've seen, if anyone's seen the Stack Overflow graph, I mean, it's just nosedived since the advent of, I don't know, GPT 3.5 or something like that. So people aren't going and searching, go and find me a code snippet for solving this thing, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? The temptation now is just to go straight into a large language model and say, this is my problem, or how do I debug this, etc. Some of that maybe is being done from within the IDE, so using things like Copilot, or if you're using Cursor. And then I think the other piece here is, and this is what I also quite like seeing, is AI is offering sort of an auto completion on steroids. So, when I've been doing some coding, and I'm not a full-time software developer, so coding's a very strong word for what I do. But when I'm writing stuff, like I use Cursor, it's just phenomenal at auto-completing what I'm going to be working on next. Like 9 times out of 10, it's just writing the function for me correctly based on everything else it's seeing in the context. So the time saving you get alone from just this super advanced autocomplete, in addition to research and addition to creating POCs, that is having an immediate impact for those who are embracing it, I think. I don't think it's necessarily changing the whole kind of like how you wake up in the morning. I don't know if it's sort of, I don't think this has got its tentacles completely into our lives yet. It's still a thing you go to. But again, that's probably just in a matter of time, right?
I agree. And I think that, you have different groups of people here. And I understand completely the discussion. You have the people that they are jumping onto the thing, they are doing the thing super fast, and there are people that saying, the result is a mess, and it's true, the result is a mess. It's like if you don't really try really hard to tame the large language model, everything is going to be a mess. But that doesn't mean that this is it's a bad tool. Probably the problem is that we are not using the tool correctly. So that's another discussion, which is how right now is how different is for a developer the life, compared to 2 years ago, whatever. And the other is how it's going to be compared with the future, and how these things are evolving. We are in this point where everything is changing and everything sounds, essentially you don't know what is going to happen in 2 years. But since clear, at least the path, the skills are going to change for everyone. I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, the big companies are going to start, you have an interview for the developers, which is an on-site interview. I wouldn't be surprised if they give you cursor and say, do this. So they can not only check your technical skills, but how you are using the tool, how you are thinking about the problem. That's probably one of the things that are going to change a lot is how these some of the skills that were not so important before. It's not that it's important that, but some other were more more strong. Now they are falling, and some of the others are rising. Yeah.
So mess. I picked up on the word that you said, mess, there. So there's a mess. So I'm going to give you a slight analogy here, and that is my sons. They're learning how to add up, and they're doing it in their mental arithmetic, and they're doing it on paper with larger numbers, and probably some of their sums that they're doing, I think, oh no, I'm just going to use the calculator. But they've got the ability to understand that something's a mess. And then I don't want to cast dispersions on different generations, but sometimes you get people that look at an Excel spreadsheet and then just go, this is the answer. I said, well, it can't be. Like if you've had that ability to do a mental arithmetic, you can't just take that answer as given because, well, obviously, 10 times 2 is not 6. And I'm using a bit of a simplification there. So developers have the ability currently to understand what the mess is. So this then brings me to 2 further points. One of them is what happens when we're going after speed and scale. Can they understand what the mess is? The second point is while also improving their ability to give the correct prompts, to use AI, as you said, how, Jose, when you're talking about in the interview process, then being able to show that. But it seems to me that those 2 things are connected. Are they connected? And if so, what can be done?
This is a little, you know, I have all enough to have lived so many changes in the development and workflows. When everyone was talking about test-driven development, as you know, the waterfall and everything, object-oriented. This feels like something, feels like a change in the way we are going to do the things for some people, at least. And I think that for, trying to fix the mess or or avoid the mess, the first thing is to change the way developers think, which is like a super strong thing. Because you are okay. So your mind is in a specific way. You have to educate yourself to think in a way, and you need to think in another way right now. So that's a problem. Um, and regarding the other thing is, well, in fact, this is the same thing. Okay, so once you know how to think about the problem using the large language model, because at the end of the day, the large language model is like, if it is good enough, you only need to ask whatever you want. But it's okay. So it's super easy to have a mess because it's like, let's say that I have an excavator. Okay, I don't know how to use it. It can do so many things faster. But you can, if you are not using it correctly, you are going to break everything. That's more or less the same. You really need to know how to ask the large language model to do whatever you want to do. But there is a process. In this thing, this is going to be a process. For example, I am using my own process. So I think about the requirements and then I discuss with the large language model about the requirements. Once I have the requirements there, then I create preconditions and post conditions for every single part of the project. Then once I have that thing, I start asking for coding that part. But the coding part is like the third or fourth step. I'm not jumping into the coding. So I think that patient, that critic thinking is the thing that we are going to need to develop. And that's why you will need to have an interview specific to check if that is, the candidate that it has that thing. So, well, I don't know. I don't know if that answered the question.
My my son is 10 years old. Obviously, he's perfectly good at mental arithmetic, etc. But there have been occasions, I can't remember what the exact thing was recently, but there was one where he'd done some sort of calculation, and I asked, like, "Are you sure that's correct?" Because to your point, Ryan, like, if you just apply some sort of intuition or common sense and you look at the sort of verification, of the answer, you you can sense check whether the answer you derived in your calculation was even in the ballpark. Like, I don't know, I think he was off by a factor of 10. I was like, how could if you just simplified this to 10 times 100, it's 1,000. So how could your answer be 200 or something like that, right? It was that kind of like, if you just know, it's not a question of the mental arithmetic itself, because he just made a silly mistake. But if you know how to verify, if you remember to apply that, and if you know how to verify, at the risk of I'm getting to a question. So at the risk of drawing a possibly completely terrible analogy to like the whole P equals MP kind of domain, my question, I guess, is it a necessary necessity to have built up the skills in something like software development to divert the intuition in order to be able to verify or to cut through that mess? Or is the next generation of developers potentially going to be taught without necessarily being hardcore, assembly, C++, Java developers? Are you able to learn how to do that verification step without necessarily having 10 years of background in the hard problem, if that makes sense? In the same way that, can you teach someone to verify a calculation without them necessarily having a deep understand. I don't know, maybe it's domain specific, but I think that's possibly going to determine how far we go in one direction or another direction, or how blended this is. Because there's been a lot of stuff out there recently about developers being illiterate, or AI making developers illiterate because they aren't necessarily learning how to write code anymore because the AI is generating the code for them. My question is, so what? Or is that necessarily a bad thing? I think there's always going to be a need for some group of people to be able to write code, in the same way that if I was doing some research on papers 20, 30 years ago that were arguing that high-level languages like Fortran and things like that were making developers illiterate because 90% of developers were writing code in assembly. And so there were arguments saying that all these high-level languages are breaking, we're losing the skill to be able to write high-performance code, etc. I mean, you'd be insane if you tried to write high-performing code in assembly outside of a very, very narrow scope of circumstances. So is it inevitable that AI is going to open up a whole new way of looking at software development, where you still maintain this kind of legacy of hardcore developers that write the code, as long as the majority of developers have the right skill set to cut through the mess?
Good. So I'm gonna go all in and try and say something technical. Wish me luck. Does this not come down to levels of abstraction?
Yeah.
Because if you were to say code, is there an argument that code is actually ones and zeros, and anything above that is an abstraction? And then so you've got C, I think it's like a next really fundamental version, and then you've got things built on there that abstract you further. And then what we're doing now is extracting that to a code that everybody or most people learned at kindergarten, being able to do it with natural language. And I don't want to go into a kind of a signs and signifiers, post-structuralist, postmodern rant here, but isn't there an argument that actually written language is in itself a code? And we're seeing this accelerate now because it's a huge step in comparison, but is it different from binary through to some of the, a coding language like C? Is that the same kind of action?
I'm gonna make 2 points. Number one, Jack Reeves in 1991, which is like 10 years before the Agile Manifesto, wrote a paper that basically argued that all software development is design. The only actual sort of assembly that is happening, the only actual execution that's happening inside the CPU, up until even source code, all of that, even a binary source code file, all of that is simply a design artifact, because it is a set of instructions. It is a set of a code, literally a code in the linguistic sense, for what you want a particular CPU or network of CPUs to do, etc. So by that argument, yeah, you're talking about sort of fundamentally we're tricking physics and how to do things with electrons and silicon and all that kind of stuff. And up until that point, everything is design, and AI is just giving us a natural layer on top of the highest current level of languages that we have available to us today. I mean, I'm sure GPT could probably create assembly if you really wanted it to, but you don't tend to need to. From a so I think definitely it is definitely about those levels of abstraction, for sure. I can't remember what my other point was now.
But I don't know if I agree. I mean,
Good.
the fundamental difference for natural language and formal language is that one is formal and the other is natural. So you can there is a reason why we need math. You cannot express with that formality in natural language, and so I wouldn't see this like an abstraction. Like the next step of the abstraction is it's an abstraction in the sense that I can use it for coding, but I need code. I don't think that Okay, so there is a trend right now. The other day I was reading a post, someone saying English is going to be the next coding language. I don't think that's going to happen. Because they are the step is to be between English or a natural language and C or Python or whatever. It's too big. And
That doesn't that depend on the domain? Because if you were developing a specific algorithm, you would need that level of precision, let's say, in the language, and that would lend itself to a more rigorous, methodical approach, like maths or code. But 19%, I'm just making that up, 90% of software development is a web application and green buttons that do things, etc. So I think I'm wondering if it makes sense to distinguish between hard problems, algorithmic problems, etc., cryptography, blah blah blah, that requires that level of precision versus most of product development, which is more about the user experience, behaviors of the product. And that, for me personally, is very naturally, you look at the unfortunately, it never really took off in a large extent, but things like BDD, Gherkin, as a way of describing the behavior you'd expect, very easy to communicate, very easy for people to understand, but it was just too much work for people to write the Gherkin and the tests and the code. But it is a very natural way to express a set of expectations without worrying too much about the syntax. Right?
Kind of Gherkin, because I come from a testing background, and we found that I was always kind of armchair enthusiast on these things, but Gherkin is very easy to get wrong, and I think it is the complexity of language is kind of the problem there. And I realize now I've jumped over to Jose's side on this argument, but I'm playing devil's advocate. But actually, like trying to codify with language, uh, uh, the classic one is candle. So where if I put a match to the candle, then blah blah blah, it lights. But a candle means something very different in a church to what it means on a birthday cake. So then trying to break that down, an hour, because when we understand a word, it is understood also in its context, and it often needs much more context, which makes language more difficult to turn into a yes or a no. And I don't think I've explained that particularly well.
no, I agree. Well, I agree because I cannot see beyond 1 or 2 years, to be honest. I tried it so many times. It's so difficult. Maybe in 3, 4, 5 years, maybe things are going to be completely different because something is going to appear. But I don't see how. I mean, I don't see a clear path between what we are right now and using a natural language as the way to code, which probably put us again into the situation of, are we creating illiterate developers with these tools? Because if you are going to need the lateral language and the code, the actual code, then the people is going to lose it. I think that there is something super interesting. I remember in the beginning when the people was starting to use ChatGPT and things like that, they said it's is more productive for juniors and less productive for seniors. But now it's the other way around. It's like juniors are failing too much, so this is not productive enough. The guys that they are really, making the things right is the seniors. It's like the other way around. And I think that's the key. You need that 10 years that Fraser was saying to, i- understand the system, to put in your head the way to explain to a large language model in natural language what you really want. Otherwise, you are going to lose a lot of nuances. And another thing is that you have the result. And one of the most important things is you need to check the result. People is just accepting it.
Because and that's a natural human thing to do, right? We take shortcuts. We take the most energy efficient route. So, I mean, if we sort of project this forward a little bit, we're either saying that out of necessity there will be some kind of error correction where, I don't know, the AI tools or the AI itself, whatever, will sort of force developers to pay more attention to what's being created. Maybe we bake that into the workflows or into the tooling, etc. Or we're going to end up in the situation where in 10 years' time, it is still, I'm not completely convinced that this is the case out in the majority of circumstances, but the challenge is that in 10 years' time, we'll be in a position where it is still necessary to have 10 years of experience in order to be able to verify and use AI correctly. But we now have a whole load of developers that have been using AI and haven't actually built up that experience. But we're going to end up in some sort of like desert of AI of development skills needed. Needed in order to successfully continue, and presumably we're going to be in some sort of crisis in 10 years' time, unless things are sort of naturally self-correcting in the meantime.
I don't have an answer, and to be honest, I don't have even a good projection. I only see 2 years from now, and but if I am honest, I will say in 10 years, I see it's easier for taking into consideration the trend that people has just created new skills using large language model, and maybe the code is not going to be needed anymore. I don't know, but I don't see how. Right?
Fall into that sort of self-correcting.
Yes.
As this develops over the 10 years, necessity, we will bake in the processes, the whatever it is, in order to because I think, I mean, most things always boil down to things like economics, right? If organizations are not seeing value returned on the dollars they're spending on AI, then they won't use it. There's no moral obligation to use AI. There's no, maybe there's initial sort of hype about it and fun about it, but but if it becomes uneconomical because software developers are just getting worse and worse, and the AI is, not scaling effectively, not costly, that would necessarily have to drive some sort of correction in the process anyway. So it's a question of, I guess, whether it's gonna. So you brought up agriculture, Ryan, early on, right? And you said that you mentioned the fact that agriculture introduced disease because suddenly we were in a proximity to animals that we weren't before, and disease was able to spread because we were starting to build communities around farms, etc. So if you look at the anthropologically, the history of human suffering, obviously it was hard. If you were a gatherer hunter, things were hard, but things got a lot harder after the introduction of farming, because you grew, because you put all of your eggs into one basket, which is the field, and if that field was destroyed in a flood, then suddenly you had a lot more famine, etc., etc. So there's an argument that we're possibly going through something similar now with AI, where the long term, we don't know what the long term consequences of AI are going to be, but as each decision we're making today, we're trying to move in the positive direction. We think we're making lives easier for ourselves in the short term, but in the long term, we just have no. It's impossible to know what the long-term implications are of AI. So I think that the error correction, I guess the question is whether we have the foresight as this develops to put in place the governance or the ethics committees. Like, how far are we going to be from having ethicists on some sort of the company board, etc., who help guide the usage of AI in greater and greater domains and greater impact on our daily lives. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is we have to be proactive in trying to be aware of the problems that we're creating today for developers and for the consumers of software, and not necessarily just sort of play it safe and just sort of watch it emerge.
Yeah, I think it's one of those problems, by the way.
Denise, firstly, the conversation that Fraser's alluding to for viewers and listeners was a preamble before we started recording. So just to put people in there. But I mean, Fraser, I'm loving your crystal ball here. But I mean, I think to kind of, we're not going to know what happens until it's too late on that front, and I don't want to paint a dystopian future, but I genuinely, unforeseen circumstances, and I could see, there was a period in British education where grammar in writing and spelling wasn't seen as a problem. So like the 70s just went, go ahead, write what you want. I went to this. And then you had people went, actually, spelling and grammar is quite important. But all the teachers had gone through a system where spelling and grammar wasn't important. So, and I'm using a bit of hyperbole here. So then you ended up in a situation where you had teachers that weren't able to spell or write grammatically correct, trying to teach kids to spell grammatically correct, and then it becomes, like a vicious circle. So I think that the kind of picture we're painting here is, if we don't, and to go to your Jose, your previous one about the excavator, if you can't dig a hole with a spade, then you can't dig a hole with an excavator. You need to be able to understand how to dig a hole before you can max it out. So I think that that where we've ended up is the fundamentals of being a developer are really necessary to get the most out of AI at the moment. And if you don't have those fundamentals, you can't see the mess. You don't have those fundamentals, you can't appropriately prompt it.
Yeah.
You think that's how we ended up?
I agree with that view right now. Okay, so like I have been evolving my different opinions, and one of the in my position right now is, if you don't know enough about coding, it's super easy to lose the track, and to have a mess in your code, and you are not going to be able to see what is happening behind the scenes, because right now we are not living in a world where the things are done in natural language. The things are done in Python or in C or whatever. If you are going to transform your natural language into something, it's better that you know that something. And then it's better that you know that something in a detailed way. You need to understand the nuances, because the large language model is usually creating something that you don't have exactly in mind. And you really need to know, to understand what are the differences between what you had in mind and what is really happening. Because at the end of the day, you need to put, that server needs to be multi-tenant and needs to be, they are run races, and you have so many problems that are related with the code. It's not related with the design. It's not related with how you express your idea in English. Is the problem is the code. Yeah, you created in English or whatever, but then you need to check. Oh, there is a problem.
So I guess the question is, the checking, is this at the line by line of code level? Like, are we looking for bugs here or implementation flaws, or are we looking the fact that it didn't actually implement the design that you were trying to articulate? And go to the point, like the whole language thing, language is deliberately imprecise and can't ever be super precise anyway. So there's always going to be this gulf between natural language and code. So are you focusing on like the like bugs, or do we think that AI is going to create bug-free code?
I will say three things. Okay, so if you are in the first iteration, you really need to be super careful about how you are creating the requirements, the preconditions, all these things. Even even you create the tests. This is why I think that TDD is more near to the skills we are going to need. And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm saying this is more near, but they are like a higher level of skills that you will need to develop. But if you're in the first iteration, you really need to understand that thing super well. But once the code is there and is in production, they say you are happy enough because everything is organized, and then you put the thing into production and you see that it's doing something that you don't really understand what is happening here. You need to develop how to be critic with the code that was created by something that is not you. And by the way, I have suffered something super strange. This in these months, there is something before when I was creating something, and I was reading my own code like 3 months after that thing. In the beginning, you don't remember anything, but then you say, oh yeah, I decided this thing, and then you remember your own position there. But now that is not happening to me because the code, I didn't write that code.
Hmm.
I created the whole idea, I created the whole infrastructure, I created the whole thing, but I was not actually writing the code. And sometimes the other day I saw something, I said, I don't like this. Who created this thing? It was me. And I was super surprised about that code. I said, this is not me. I cannot see myself in that code. And that was super weird. And then I understood, yes, this is going to happen from now on. I'm not going to be able to put myself into that position because this code was not written by me, was written by my instructions. And then I was happy. I read the whole thing. I was happy. But then 2 months after that, I check it. I say, I don't like it, but I don't know why.
That would be with every piece of code I ever wrote. So
I wrote this.
You'll say more about your inability to document your code than the actual AI. Shouldn't you have been writing this down while and documenting it? Is that not best practice?
Yeah, but it's not about the documentation. It's about to see yourself, in that code. You can see your ideas, your brain, your way to think in your code. It's super easy because when you are creating something that is, your thing. At least in my case, I don't remember anything, and then I start in 20 minutes. I say, yes, and I became myself into 2 months ago.
But so, I mean, over a 2-month period, this doesn't apply, but that happens anyway with human software developers, because as a developer, you're not static for these 10 years of experience. You are evolving over this 10 years. So if you look at code you wrote 2 years ago, you'll see yourself. 2 months ago, you'll see yourself. If you look at code you wrote 4 years ago, you're going to be thinking, oh my God, yeah, that's terrible, etc. Right? So
Or you say, oh wow, how good I was.
re-experienced that myself, but I mean, this kind of, I guess, comes back to the whole sort of like, you treat AI as like an intern who's doing something on your instructions. So like, I guess my question is, does it really matter if you don't see yourself in that code anyway? Fine, you've identified, maybe with hindsight, you've identified some code that's suboptimal or could be improved, etc. But it feels less relevant to whether you wrote it or whether AI wrote it. The fact is, there was a process that identified this thing that now needs to be changed, and that's a universal software development thing, right?
Well, you know, I think it's important that you see yourself in the code because you can put yourself in that moment and you can remember why the things are done in a way. And now it's like when I was checking the code, I was like, what was my idea here? I don't remember it. My point here, and it was more difficult to me to find the problem. So I don't know. I mean, I am old school, and I am trying to push myself into the school is very hard. And sometimes I see like this schizophrenical way that I am thinking one thing, and 2 minutes after that thing, I am thinking exactly the opposite. It's like, oh, I need the code, skills, and everything, and then I say, it's not that important.
What you just described as sort of mentally reconstructing the code from an earlier memory of having, that's a very human thing, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's a question of whether that's a redundant anyway, because the AI is just going to review the code within microseconds or whatever, milliseconds, and pull together the context that you're trying to sort of reconstruct from partial.
Yeah, yeah,
So like that's a very, I think you're sort of attached to that sort of human experience.
yeah.
I don't know if that's a criteria for the necessity of
No.
old.
No, 100% is not a criteria. It's just like I, developers are feeling something.
Right, which I think we haven't really discussed this, which is the emotional impact on developers, either in medium, short term, or long term. Like, obviously, you can talk about sort of being made redundant if AI is able to, do 70% of the work, then you need less workforce. I think in all of our history, we were talking about this in another conversation, Ryan, weren't we? Where you were saying about the level of automation. There's a correlation between the amount of automation in the world and the number of jobs. Just because AI might change software development doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have fewer software developers. It just maybe changes their role. But even then, from a day-to-day point of view, there's still potentially an emotional need of a human that is taken away from a developer, even if they still had job security, by AI, that maybe you sort of kind of express there.
I've got a weird analogy here that I was thinking about this the other day. So my brother-in-law, he's got this rather fancy coffee machine, and you basically fill it with water, fill it with beans, you press a button and you get your espresso. And I have, the grinder and my towel and then the whole thing. And my coffee, I think is excellent. But then when I have 5 people around, the father-in-law, the brother-in-law, I think, I wish I had that machine. But there is an emotional connection to it. And then sorry, I think your point's great, Fraser, but I'm going to add a little bit to it. And that is, what you were talking about previously, Jose, about, like, I can't get my mind in there. Isn't that, for a business perspective, a good thing? What happens if you get hit by a bus, to use the old analogy? Secondly, our memories play tricks on us. I remember way back when I was in love with my wife, and that memory still persists. I'm not so sure why. But we do as humans, please don't write in. I do love my wife. But we as humans, actually, that emotional thing, again, it can be a good thing because, you drive forward and that, but actually, in a kind of business sense, removing the emotion is good. But I still think it seems like Fraser's point.
On that one, I just want to say something. This is going off on a random tangent, but I'm wondering if social media is dead. And we talk about, what was it, the dead internet, etc. Like with AI being able to generate all sorts of toe licking videos and things like that, right? Is there any point in looking at social media because it's just so full of AI generated stuff that it's nonsensical, right? There's just like, in any political direction, there's fake news, fake this, fake that. We just sort of saturate ourselves with a lack of truth to the point where you just go, there's nothing I can do here as a human because I can't trust anything and it's dead. Now, I'm wondering, bringing this back to the conversation, I wonder if there's a sort of utility thing here where AI might bring about a change from an economic point of view. And as you say, from a company point of view, it's good that humans don't have that sort of involvement. And if Jose gets hit by a bus, someone else can continue it, et cetera, et cetera. sort of thinking about like the work of like Byung-Chul Han, maybe that forces developers to focus more on the craftsmanship of things, doing things for the sake of things rather than because of utility. Maybe there's a place for human emotions that doesn't have to have some economic utility and some outcome that needs to be driven. I'm wondering if maybe AI, this is going a way tangent, but I wonder if AI is going to bring about a natural sort of, you know what, AI is doing this for me. I'm just going to do this for the sake of it because I can, rather than because it gets me to X.
Yeah, this reminds me very much of the kind of thoughts around the internet in the 90s of this utopian, didn't really work out where's the planned though, Fraser. So I don't want to,
Yeah.
your parade there.
Well, I'm speculating as to whether it's as part of the, as we said, our sort of rampant speculation here. I'm wondering if I'm wondering if AI creates not just a technical, but a bit of an emotional void that as humans, we naturally have to fill in anyway. I don't think it will. I think AI is going to be sort of tempered by constraints like power and scale and things like that. I think that AI is fundamentally probably going to be more of a utility than anything else. But it's an interesting sort of direction to take this. If the arguments we've laid out, if you take them without course correction to an extreme, that seems to suggest possibly where this is heading, but I don't buy into that myself.
No, agreed. And I do like a bit of rampant speculation, even if I'm going to.
But my point, and my point earlier though, is I don't think we should leave this to chance. So as we are making decisions, whether you're a developer building an AI product or on a sort of AI governance boards, I think these kind of discussions and these kind of decisions, we need to be thinking not just at the problem we're trying to solve today, but in the broader context of why we're making that decision and how we're making that decision. I think that's going to be an important part. We like to focus on the technology side of things, but I think there needs to be more broader thought about the human involvement of AI as well. But we tend to not see that so much.
And this might be one for another podcast. We might need to stick a pin in this, but so humans are irrational. So it is a great marketer, and he does a piece on Coca-Cola versus Red Bull. How would you beat Coca-Cola? You get a drink that tastes better than Coca-Cola. You do it, you make it cheaper than Coca-Cola, and you sell it in twice the volume of Coca-Cola. Red Bull came along. It tastes awful. It's twice as expensive, and it's in a smaller can. And irrationally, everybody just flocks towards it because humans are irrational. So, can AI, and I know we've had a little bit of a discussion about this phrase, can AI be irrational? I think we should probably do a couple of sentences each on this and potentially have that for a future episode of the podcast. Can it be irrational?
I think it can, because it's trained with our knowledge, and our knowledge is not rational. So we are trying to push. Okay, so we are trying we are training large language model to act or think as a human. Okay, it's not exactly that, but you know the idea. But the corpus, the data set, is not exactly rational. So you cannot expect to have a rational or 100% rational behavior. No, I don't know.
I think it can act. It depends on your definition of irrational. I think that it's too constrained. So it can seem irrational based on what it's being trained on and this probabilistic, decision it's going to make to arrive at that particular response to your particular question. That could seem irrational, but I don't think LLMs have the depth of decision making. Maybe if you have I guess we were talking about an LLM. I don't think an LLM can be irrational. I think if you have some sort of complex agentic approach, you could see irrationality built in based on the voting between a bunch of different agents and all that kind of stuff. I think that's where you would need that kind of level of complexity in order to start seeing irrationality. Because what does irrational mean? Irrational, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, so I'm going to get this wrong, but irrationality means it's sort of counter to sort of correctness or the logical approach, whatever that means, right? So, yeah, am I being irrational by hitting myself on the head? I mean, to some extent, that kind of depends, right? Maybe there's a good reason why I should do that, or maybe there isn't. It depends. So, I think irrationality can be contextual as well, and I think an agentic approach would have to have the level of depth and complexity in order to be closer to irrationality. But a large language model, I don't think could be irrational. But AI in principle could be.
So I think that brings us very neatly for me to say that whatever the future holds for developers, there is going to be greater amount of AI in their daily lives, which means they'll probably need to think more in the planning stage. And they should also probably think about security in their planning stage, shifting security left through Irius Risk. You know, our proud sponsors and patrons and employers, Irius Risk, a threat modeling platform, which allows you to understand your security risks at the design stage when you would be first using your AI. I would recommend you having a look at the website, signing up for the community edition, seeing how wonderful it is, and then paying for it so that we all remain where we are. So thank you, Fraser, Jose. Anything to add?
No, it was wonderful. Thank you.
The inaugural, an absolute pleasure. Ciao, ciao for now.
Hey, so bye.